More now on the Republican tax plan that is inching its way through the Senate. We're joined by University of California, Berkeley professor of economics, Brad DeLong. He was a Treasury Secretary Deputy Assistant under Bill Clinton. Brad,
Yes.
we've run into some difficulties in the Senate by the looks of things. One of the potential stumbling blocks, this trigger over raising the tax rate if revenue targets are not met. What potential difficulties can you see as the Senate vote unfolds over the next few hours?
A great many. That is, apparently the trigger has failed the so-called bird bath and has been removed from the bill. And they're frantically trying, the Republicans on the floor are frantically trying to come up with a substitute that's acceptable both to the more Democratic or the more deficit hawkish members of their caucus, and also to the more kind of supply side optimistic members. In a way, it's crazy. That is, I think the bill still has a 70% chance of passing, and certainly the stock market here in the U.S. thinks it has a 70% chance of passing. But we really shouldn't be here at all, right? That there are something like 12 Democratic senators who would gladly sign on to a corporate tax cut that broadened the base and lowered the rates, provided they could be convinced that it wasn't just another shift in the income distribution from the non-rich to the rich. And yet McConnell is rolling forward with this Republican-only thing that truly is down to the wire.
Well, Professor DeLong, let's assume that the tax cuts get through both houses.
Yep.
We've had a couple of Fed speakers question the benefits of the tax plan when it comes to economic growth, thinking the impact won't be that big. Now, you also think that this focus on the benefits to GDP growth might be a little bit misleading, right?
Yeah, well, problem is that the expensing provision expires. And a lot of the growth oomph comes from the expensing provision. And if you have the expensing provision expire, what that means is you then get corporations to kind of push a whole bunch of their investment spending into the near future while the window is open. And then after the window is closed, they cut back on investment spending. So you're almost guaranteeing a small boom and then a small bust in the economy simply by the way that your tax bill is structured. And, Republicans say that when the time comes around for expensing to expire, it won't. But they're not a terribly trustworthy group, and that would require they maintain control of all three effective branches of the government, which they will not. That, it's not only the case that there are 12 potential Democrats in line to support a broaden the base, lower the rates corporate tax cut, but there are also ways to design it that do mean that it will provide a significant plus to economic growth. And yet the Joint Tax Committee's report newly out says that what we're talking about 0.08% per year. Barely enough to see over the next decade, and that's for GDP, right? That's for how much is produced in the United States. For how much flows in income to Americans, it's a zero or even a small minus. And since there are powerful efficiency benefits from rationalizing the American corporate tax system, I'm once again flummoxed that we're here with this technocratically bad a proposal right at this particular late date. They've had a lot of time to prepare for and work on this, and yet very little work had been done until the past 2 weeks.
It's sort of like you don't do your homework until the very last minute, right? Or you don't study until your very last.
It seems to be. It seems to be.
Can't break those bad habits, right, Brad?
No.
I want to ask you though, because we were talking to Stan Colliner about this earlier as well, where. In his view, this whole tax reform package is coming at the wrong time. The economy is not doing that badly. We don't need to have this kind of tax reform. In fact, he says that if we do, he sees a recession around the corner in the U.S. Do you?
Well, first of all, I want to ask if my friend Stan seems fully mentally glued together these days, because he did make his career as kind of the high priest of informing the budget technocracy, informing people about how the rational U.S. government budget process ran, and now that process has totally collapsed. And so he's been kind of extremely irate about it whenever I've talked to him over the past 6 months or so. Well, has he calmed down, or is he still irate?
No, he's still irate. He's still irate. I'll let him know you're questioning his sanity.
All right. Yes. Now, but recession, I think recession's a bit strong. There definitely is a significant minus coming from the expiration of expensing. And there is the possibility that each time you load on the national debt a little more, you increase potential financial instability, and you do add a little bit to recessionary dangers. But interest rates are still extremely low. The benefits of this tax cut do indeed come from the non-rich and do flow to the rich and to those who would be financially levered as well.
Right.
So I'd say slower growth rather than a risk of slower growth rather than a serious risk of recession from here.
Okay, and Brad, we've only got about a minute left. Tell me what your thoughts about seeing Powell in Washington and his testimony earlier this week. What was your impression?
I think Jay Powell is an excellent choice. He was an extremely effective Undersecretary of the Treasury back in the George H.W. Bush administration. He's been a very responsible and positive contributor to Federal Reserve Board discussions and debates over the past N years. And he's a very good administrator. He's going to be a polite and effective manager of whatever the consensus of the Federal Reserve Board or the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee happens to be. The question is the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee have the right model of the economy? And that debate will continue to roll forward. And he won't be a strong advocate on any side for that. But then if he's a consensus chairman, that's the appropriate role for him to take.